Welcome to another Enspiral podcast. Today we're going to talk about embodiment with Emily. Emily, how do you feel? Show us in your body. What is your feeling as we're arriving into the first podcast that is not directly about Enspiral?
You're doing the facilitating. How do I feel? Yeah, there's like
I like that.
I feel prickly. Yeah, today I feel prickly.
Prickly. I like that. How come that you got interested in this whole area of body and embodiment? How did you arrive at it? I know it's a kind of a important topic for you, but I'm curious, how did it happen?
Yeah, I think really simple. I come from a family where nobody is embodied, and I somehow at a very young age searched out communities, performance, improvisation, dance. At a very young age, I got involved in contact improvisation, which to me was a form of physical touch that was sort of a mutual coming together of bodies that is very different than with a lover or with a family member or with children. It's sort of an agreement somehow that I was really drawn to, and I've built on that. And I think with mental health struggles, I started to really realize that my body held a lot of information that would be useful. Just like a wealth of like, oh, my brain say blah, 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 this is good, this is bad, this is whatever, because I've been conditioned, but my body will actually be the thing that's like, And it's taken years to figure out how to listen to it. I'm still figuring it out. It's still, I fight with it, I think, a bit. So there's sort of this embodiment of going into your body, but I also think our bodies is where, if we talk about creativity or intuition or flow, we talk about empathy, we talk about connection. Like, I think that our first sight is in all of this. It's with ourselves and with others. And then COVID, so I have all of this experience, but that was sort of what I did personally. I didn't really bring it into my research or into my teaching. But I found that when I teach design, I would do all of these, it has to go poof, and I realized that like actually my communication, the buttons need to go, like whatever it is. And I started to realize some people teach design like a composer, and some people teach design, very technically, and I do it very physically. Like there's my understanding of interaction or composition or space. A lot of my work is exhibition design, and it's moving through space. Motion graphics, video editing, and I realize I feel it here. Like if I do it up here, it's not going to work. And so I think post-COVID or during COVID, I started to do a lot of online things, and I felt like I was losing that ability. And so I started to develop a lot of techniques to be online, which I'll share one with you. Yeah, and that has developed into now I'm sort of looking at putting together with a group of educators a somatic school of design research.
Wow.
So what is it that our bodies can help us to as a site of research? And that's on every level. Even, I mean, I'm always really quick to kind of say, yes, it's about well-being. It's about mindfulness, and these things are really important, but it's also about understanding discomfort. It's also about, there's a political element, is where is my body comfortable? where is my body allowed to enter, where you know, whether it's because of the color of my skin or the ability of my body. I mean, and I'm a fully privileged, able-bodied, you know, white cis woman, but my body can understand when I'm not welcome. And I think that gives me a connection to what would it be like if you are really, you know, the space is not built for you, the community is not looking like you, and how is it that we can actually find a connection, you know, through those experiences, not always in our head.
Wow, as you're sharing this, so many questions are coming up for me. Maybe let's start with this first thought, that how do you actually listen to your body? I mean, I can really much connect to this feeling that, you know, there's sometimes I get stuck in my head just thinking, or, you know, working, creating, but then my body's like, there's, yeah, I know that it wants to tell me something, but I'm already kind of, I feel like I find myself being quite embodied, and I even now I'm standing, you know, and most of my whole space where I live is actually designed for me to move as much as possible, and that's deliberately. But what are some ways to cultivate that more and actually to hear what the body is trying to say?
I think everybody does it differently. I can only speak for myself. I think it's actually quiet. Like, for me, it actually came out of anxiety, right? Like, I had some pretty severe anxiety over the years, and I would push away, and it would still come up, right? Whatever it is, an uncomfortable conversation, something I have to take care of, a memory that I don't want to have to deal with. I don't know, like something that I have to work on, and it comes up, and for me it's a lot in my belly, my lower belly, my hips, my hip bones, and sort of coming up into my psoas, and you know, or my jaw. And I can just, it's like if I feel this thing here, and now I can be like, oh, there it is. I mean, it took me a long time to be like, oh, there it is. And then it's like, okay, what happened, you know, what is it that I'm maybe not getting out? Or I have this a lot, right? Like I did this a lot. And then it was like, oh, wait a second. Like, why am I trying so hard? Where is that coming from? And so it is listening. Like, to be embodied is not always to move. I think to be embodied is actually stillness and listening. And I think the other thing that I think I've learned that's really nice is that we have patterns in our bodies that we've learned, that we repeat because they're familiar. And to be embodied is also to break those patterns. I think I lay on the floor when I can, and it's just trying to listen to where's the impulse. And then if I follow that impulse, where does it go next? And I'm not dancing. I'm not, you know, I'm not lost in this. I'm actually trying to respond to an itch, you know what I mean? And then something that feels like it needs to be pulled for a second, but not like 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, like. And so it's not like, it's not an achievement. It's not something to accomplish. I think it's really in the quiet listening. And sometimes I'm good at it and sometimes I'm not good at it. But what I do know is now I can feel like I didn't have this 10 years ago. I can really feel when there's something really joyful, and I'm like, oh, that's joy, you know, and being like, rather than being like, oh, that's really nice, you know, and or this is really, there's something got me, and I'm feeling this sort of thing that wants to, and I would really like this feeling to go away. But it's like, oh, okay, there you are. What is it? I was like, oh, yeah, I had that conversation and I didn't really communicate what I wanted and what my boundaries were. Or I think those things kind of move in and out. I mean, and then you have the whole creative field that I think that same idea of breaking patterns. If we're looking at creativity, if we're always doing the same thing over and over again, and what happens if we make it upside down, or what happens if we turn it around, and that will open up a whole other level of kind of creative pathways, whatever is going on up here. So there's this, I mean, obviously there's this mind and body thing that is, I think we know that it's not, but we all still separate it. We definitely prioritize what's up here. And they're actually quite interconnected. I'll stop talking in a moment. There's this thing I just learned about embryology, is that the fetus, when the fetus is first forming, the head and the heart are actually joined. This might not be true, but it's something that I learned. And I like the idea, right? The head and the heart are joined, and then they go boop, right? And then the heart will start to beat. But like at some point, they are the same mass of they're the same mass of stuff. And then the other thing that's kind of cool is that then your hands appear, and then your feet appear, and then your arms go out, and then your legs go out. So your arms are actually older than your legs, or your legs are older than your arms. So, but I think it just has something to do with this like miracle of this thing that's happened here, that we tend, at least like my family of, intellectual, lovely people, but there's a not a lot of kind of listening that's happening. And it's weird. I mean, I think people also kind of go, yeah, embodiment. That's my yoga class,
And it can be so much more than that.
Yeah, I think so.
What's coming up for me from my own experience and how I relate to some of the things you mentioned is that I've noticed, I don't know, like a couple of years ago, this pattern that when I'm in this deep intellectual or creative flow, but that's like really mind-based, what often happens for me is I get stuck, like, I'm solving a problem and I get stuck in just like trying to solve the problem and just kind of, almost whacking my head literally against the wall. And then, my tendency or the pattern is to just like keep going, until the wall breaks or I break, but it's just, I'm not gonna stop. And then somehow, I don't know, I don't remember how did this happen, but I just started to take breaks for my body and just either lie on the floor and do nothing, or put a song and dance, or just randomly move. And every single freaking time I solve the problem immediately. It's like, 1 minute of movement and something I've been struggling for 2 hours and just couldn't get there. It's done. And
this just made me so like
it's,
I mean, you had asked
know,
before, what can I
magical.
do? And I was gonna say, lay on the floor and roll around on the floor until you figure out what to do next. It's sort of, I love this, because then your mind is sort of doing something else, and this just dancing to one song. I do have a really cool thing that I've learned recently called OMG, which is orient, move, and ground, and it's from I learned it from a Berlin-based bodywork practitioner, Emily Pohl, and she got it from Stephen Haynes, I think his name is. And it is, if you're like in this, oh my God, like anxiety or push, or, it's funny, I go push, and it's like, even when you are in labor pains, you have like a pause in between, right? And you look for you orient by sort of looking for 5 things and mentally or verbally naming them. And I kind of do it where I say 2 words. So I'll say cracked phone, mirror reflection, dangling light, right? And I do 5 of these, and it sort of gets me to orient and pay attention. And then M is move, just however it feels good. And then ground is feeling your feet on the floor, feeling your butt on the seat, feeling your back against the wall, whatever it is, and then just having a really conscious breath. And I think these are these 3 levels of your sort of system, your nervous system, of taking in information, moving through information, breathing through things, that can help also just this little bit of a reorient. And I've passed it on to other people, and there's been this interesting responses that you can be in a really stressful situation where you can't move much, but you can still do it micro. You can just be listening and being like, oh, there's that, and there's that. And then I do a little bit of movement, and then I just feel my feet, you know? So I think it's also when you can't get on the ground and roll around till you figure out what's next, or listen to Beyonce really loud, you can do this OMG. Yeah, it's been one of my things that when I find myself, oh God, okay, hold on a second. Wow.
I remember you facilitated an open space session on our last summer gathering, and yeah, I really loved it. Like, it was very, very calming for me. Like, just so relaxing, and just taking the mind kind of like, just let it chill and ground.
We did the thing where we were changing positions, right?
Also that, yeah. But I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
the observe, move, and ground as well, like just naming things
yeah,
that you see.
yeah, yeah. I like the one where you have a position and then you sort of feel what do you need to do to adjust it in order to have another position. And so you're adjusting positions for comfort, and then you start to do the opposite, and you can adjust positions until you're like, that feels really weird. And I think those also take us out somehow. Yeah, the retreat was really nice to bring some of this stuff that I'm working on into a space where people were really open to trying more. Not everybody. It was interesting. Some people would be like, okay, embodiment, I gotta go make dinner. Yeah, you know, so it's I don't know if you've had the experience where sometimes I sit down to meditate and my brain's not having it. Like, no, don't like all the stuff that's coming up in my head, and I have to take a break from it. And I think like there are times when it's okay to sort of be like, body, too much information.
You know, there's this thing that I've noticed. I named it last summer, like kind of June-ish. But I was noticing, so like I love to dance, and you know, I'm quite comfortable to like literally walk on the street and there's a song and I'm like, I'm just gonna dance now, and just like dance in the middle of a city. But there's also a very specific kind of way of moving that for a very long time I thought I'm just dancing, but it's not really dancing. And it's really like the words that came to me last June was kinetic processing. So it's just literally like it's a movement designed for me to process information kinetically through movement. And it's like, I don't know, like I almost visualize it, like not exactly visualize, that's not a, but I can feel it in my body, that just, it's almost like connecting with thoughts and just moving them around in a way that suddenly, yeah, just like lots of connections are being made just through allowing them to move. And it's most often is, yeah, like it's movement for me, but also like coming back to what you were saying before, that being embodied is not just about like, you know, dancing and moving, but it can be about stillness. This was what was really surprising for me in your workshop again, that there was, what happened to me is I was expecting that, okay, I'm going to a body movement space, so I'm gonna be dancing a lot, I'm gonna be moving. And for me, I was just like almost still the whole time, and I barely moved, and my body was just like really optimizing for the minimal
Yeah,
amount
yeah.
of movement. And that was so surprising for me, because it's the exactly anti-pattern, or the pattern breaking for me in that sense, like being still.
Now I remember that was when we were in Portugal,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, we were in Portugal, and it was the somatic imagination, or embodied imagination. And yeah, I remember that you just you were sort of there the whole time. But that's awesome. I mean, I think that's totally awesome. It's like you just sort of tuned in. I mean, that was the four of us, and it was definitely everybody was in a different relationship. Plus, everyone got sick at that, you know. So I think there was something, our bodies were revolting in
Yeah.
some way. For
I have also like another question that is coming up for me. So you were mentioning earlier, um, like, yeah, that you come from a family that is very intellectual and, you know, not so much embodied. And I guess I can relate to that in some way. It's like a bit different for my family, but what I've noticed is when I visited my family, I think this was last year, um, I've really strongly noticed that we almost never touch each other. Like there's not, you know, like when I come and see them after not seeing them for a year, you know, we give each other like a nice hug, but that's kind of almost it, you know, and then it's like a hug, hello, and hug, goodbye. And I know that like touch is one of my love languages. Like I just really enjoy that. And, you know, like
Yeah.
it makes me feel like, okay, it's like a way of expressing love and care for another human being. So what I started to do is actually like introduce that gently in my family, like, you know, like a pat on the shoulder, on like, oh, thank you, mom, thank you, dad. And it's just changed radically the vibe in the family. Like I was there for a week, but it was such a transformational space. And I don't think any other things were different apart from this one thing that I was, and it was not even like, you know, we didn't roll on the floor and had like any kind of this kind of experiences. It was very simple. So I'm very curious, like, how do you, how can you weave this thing, like the relationship of embodiment, like as listening to yourself and your own body and being connected with it, but also interacting with a body of another human being?
It's a loaded question because I think, you know, touch is when we're teeny tiny babies, right? Like, how were we held? Our body remembers all of this stuff. You know, when we
Mm,
were little, could we climb into bed with our parents, or were our parents around, or were they together? You know, like there's, remove any grown up and just sort of say this child wants to look up and grab a hand and have the hand, you know. So I think touch is deep, deep, deep within us, both a thing that is trusting and connecting, but it can also be a thing that's actually really difficult. And that's
mm,
with sexual trauma. But I think it's also, if I'm always reaching out and I'm not getting something back, then I'm going to be afraid to reach out, because what if I don't get it back? And we just, that stuff is just in our, it just is in there. And I do think it often can start with the family. I don't have lots of training in this. This is more just experience. So I don't want to like go too far into like making sense out of it therapeutically. Um, but I can share, you know, my parents are in their 80s, and we're starting to think about end of life things. And, you know, what I want more than anything is just this, right? And I think very clearly my parents, that's hard for them.
mm,
And having that conversation with them is also awkward, because I don't know if they're going to watch this. I'm like, oh, they, and I'm starting to understand that they can give to me in very other, in a lot of other ways. And they can, like you're talking about
mm,
earlier, before the recording, you know, that that generation can be there in lots of other ways. It's just that I think there's something in that physicality, you know, that's really hard. But I fuck it, you know, there's this part of me that's like, I love you. And my way of doing that is to put my arms around you and to, I feel like a child again. But now I trust that they will receive it. They won't necessarily reciprocate, but they can receive it. And I
Mm,
think their bodies, at least, is my hope. And I think they also have started to like go, aha, okay, I get this. Um, but I translate that with my children. I'm extremely physical with my children, and have done that work. Um, and then like coming into the Enspiral, we are such a huggy, close group of people. And then, but I remember when I first came into the Enspiral network, it was like, what's happening? Touching, and it takes, some people can jump right in because they have the I don't know, they have the openness, or they have the DNA, or they have the practice to kind of be able to reach out, and other people struggle with it. And I think it's an interesting, I mean, I was talking to somebody recently that, intentional communities are often have a tricky relationship with touch, that historically a really problematic relationship with some of these ideas around touch that becomes intimacy. And there's also certain power relationships between genders and ages, and unspoken roles, and I think it's something that's worth identifying when you have a group of people who are being really vulnerable with each other. And then what happens in that vulnerability, that I have needs, right? Or I have pleasure, or I have desire. And then we talk about consent, and may I, and
mm,
can I read the room? And is there also, there's an interesting thing. I don't know, when you go to you walk into a space and everybody's doing something a certain way, we will naturally try to adapt, or it doesn't feel like a place for us, right? And that can be because we're speaking intellectually, or because we're talking about DAOs, and I'm like, I don't even know what that is when I first started. So do you know what I mean? So there's this entrance, and I think the same thing, that I think, coming into Enspiral, you're thinking, oh, this is like so vulnerable and open and amazing. But it's also, we haven't defined what our relationship is to those things. And I know for me, at least, coming into Enspiral, I've really enjoyed really feeling like it's a professional. I can be professional and creative and vulnerable. And I
mm,
can't be those things in my work. I can't I can't be professional where I'm vulnerable often, right? So
mm,
um and I think there's a certain amount of somatic embodiment that, when we go toward this idea of intimacy, that we're treading on more complicated ground. I mean, there are intentional communities where it's very polyamorous, and there's a really relationship with sort of sexual conduct that's very accepting, and that's harder for me. It's harder to really kind of open up to that. Um, so there's stuff in there too that I think is complicated. Is that, what is it? This is what I liked
mm,
about contact, is that I can touch you, and it's not an invitation. Do you see what I
mm,
mean? Like, you and I can roll around on each other, in this languid, beautiful way, because it's in the confines of contact improvisation. I have to make sure that it's plugged in. But it's not an invitation for anything more than that. And then you maybe touch me in a different way, and then I can push you away, because, but it's all this unspoken back and forth,
mm,
um, that allows us for space to actually experience touch, um, that I think is really magical. And it's because the power dynamic is there, but there's rules in an interesting way. And I think, how do you do this kind of work without rules? The Spiral doesn't have rules like that. It
mm,
brings up, I mean, I just think it's worth talking about. I know that when I do somatic work, at the level that I do it, like when I've started to teach it with students, it's like the students just open up, and then I'm like, oh my God, now I have to hold them, like, not physically, but
yeah.
I'm doing work that opens up a level of vulnerability, and as the person who's holding the space, that's also my responsibility to help foster what comes out of it. And I'm not trained to do that. I'm probably good at it, but that's also, I think, something that is difficult. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I bring this work to people, but then have it be done in a way that I can either get more trained, and I'm not that interested in holding other people's trauma anyway. So where is it that it can be life-changing and transformative, but without it being, sort of, it needs to be trauma sensitive, I think.
Yeah, I can.
The other side.
Yeah, the other side. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, if it's it can be a very vulnerable experience and really opening and really beautiful, but then, yeah, that kind of implies that some things might come up that will not be very easy, and actually might be quite traumatic, some experiences coming up. And then, yeah, like, somebody has to hold that. And as a person that opens that space, you're kind of holding it. So it can be also a lot of things to hold, and you really never know, right, what's gonna come up for people, especially if you work with people that you don't know, and it's kind of the first time that you're opening that kind of space.
Yeah. It's something I'm actually really busy with. I think with some of the IFS stuff that we had done with Carl. What's Carl's last name? Stigart? I can't remember anyway. Was some of this wheel of consent, and I think there's a lot of really nice methodologies, similarly sort of saying, hey, let's pinpoint a couple people here in the retreat that can hold the space should stuff come up. It's sort of it's like an interesting thing as Enspiral Europe is growing and trying to figure out, how do we hold space to be vulnerable and sort of transformative in this one area, which can also then feed into this professional connections and networking. And I think it's a nice model to just sort of be a little bit more attuned to the difference of the experiences that people are bringing into this amazing retreats, which was like, oh my God, this is like contact improvisation. Like, I get to just show up and not it's not like we're but I get to show up and be deeply myself and deeply appreciated, and I'm able to see what it is that I have on off, like what it is that I have, that I have the strength to go back out into the world and build upon it. And I'm really thankful for those spaces.
Yeah, it's I really like this combination that you named, that it's those retreats combine the professional side and the creative side and the vulnerable side, and it's a quite unusual combo, basically. But it makes it very, very precious. I wonder, because you mentioned, like, we are creating the spaces, but we don't really have yet like really a conversation going on about these topics and some kind of defined rules. I mean, I assume that actually some of them are there, maybe just not so explicit, but that's like part of the situation, right? So I'm curious, how do you see this whole area of embodiment and touch and vulnerability in this physical way? How this could evolve to like ensure that with time it's actually a very healthy, supportive environment that people can really feel a part of, and just gradually, not like everybody starts touching each other, but just really feel comfortable in their own bodies, whether it means hugging another person and be okay with it, or just actually having their own space and not interacting so much on a physical level.
I don't know if I have an answer. I'm thinking about I mean, so much of that stuff is usually a sort of unconscious, unwritten agreement that you learn somehow by being there. And I think there's something that can unfold that way that we like because it's not constricted. But I think in the field, it's really about having the conversation and saying, where do we want to have consent? Where do we want, like, where is the line that's we're comfortable with, or what are the, do we want to just not deal with it at all and then deal with it later? Or I do think always sort of asking for consent, right? Can I rub your back? Can I give you a hug? And then I think the other side of it is knowing that the person you're interacting with is able to communicate their boundaries. Okay, that's enough. And so it's a self-knowledge, but I think it's also a little bit like, will this person be able to push back if they're uncomfortable? If this person, and we're just talking about the length of a hug, like we walk around and then you look people in the eyes and then it's like, can I hug you? Because you get this sort of level of connection, and then it's like, no, I'm not ready to hug right now. But that's like really antisocial to say something like that. And so a lot of people be like, yeah, sure, I'll hug, but they don't necessarily feel it yet, So I think it's maybe both in those directions of what is my personal responsibility and maybe like expectation setting. It's a word I kind of, or phrase I've kind of liked. It's sort of same, like, how do you define what to expect? And I think it's newcomers, right? Like just coming to Enspiral for the first time 2 years ago, it was like I totally overgave. Like within the first 36 hours, I slept 16 hours the next, because I just was, it was just like, oh my God, and the FOMO and this is so amazing. And oh, I'm just going to open up everything and talk about all of this stuff. But then I'm also going to try to focus on my like career, and I could build up this thing. And and it literally, I was like, I just went to take a nap before dinner and I missed the final party. I slept through dinner, I slept through breakfast. It was just like,
Your body was like, done.
I was not listening to anything because it was like, I wanted to, oh, wow, I've just found my people, And so those experiences can sort of coexist, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Feels like a good moment to wrap up our conversation.
Then I would like to do something with you.
Let's
You
do
ready?
it. Yeah.
I'd like bring your fingers up to the top. Do you see my fingers are at the top of the rim? And we're simply gonna, together, if we can, we're just gonna trace the edge of the screen. And then we can go down the edge of this side. Sort of somehow feel. And along the bottom. I'll try to stay with you. Okay, I want you to point at me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Interesting.
Right? Can you, what happens if I do this? Am I going into your space?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm patting you on the head. Can I give you a big hug?
Oh, so cool.
Oh.
Interesting.
Isn't it cool? It's like, are you there? Are you
Yeah.
here? But you're actually, where is Pico?
Well, I'm not sure where are you, which side of the world you're facing right now, but it's generally westward, southwest from where you are.
Yeah, I think you're over there somewhere.
Yeah, you're gonna be like there. That's an
Isn't that
interesting game
crazy?
to
I
play.
love this. No, I love this. And then you have there, right? It's
Yeah,
like there's
that
some
was my instinct to point at you there.
channel between me and you, but then there's you, but then there's you, and then there's you, and then there's you.
Hmm.
Oh, thank
Thank you
you.
so much for the beautiful conversation. After
Yeah,
after it, I'm gonna roll on the floor for a bit.
until you figure out what to do next.
Exactly.
I'm going to the Women's March because it is International Women's Day in Berlin.
Mm,
So I'm gonna go
magnificent.
march.